Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Daily headlines of racial division, a growing immigrant crisis, rising murder rates, and declining church attendance prove America is on a dangerous path of destruction. While some feel the situation is dire, Dr. James Garlow and David Barton believe America can still be saved. David Barton is the founder and president of Wall Builders, a pro-family organization that presents Americans' forgotten history and heroes. Additionally, he's the author of numerous best-selling books, with the subjects being drawn largely from his massive library of tens of thousands of original writings from the founding era. His exhaustive research has rendered him an expert in historical and constitutional issues. He serves as a consultant to state and federal legislators, has participated in several cases at the Supreme Court, was involved in the development of the history and social studies standard for states such as Texas and California, and has helped produce history textbooks now used in schools across the nation. A national news organization described him as America's historian, and Time magazine called him a hero to millions, including some powerful politicians. In fact, Newsmax named him one of America's 100 most influential evangelicals, and Time named him one of America's 25 most influential evangelicals. He's received numerous national and international awards, including Who's Who in Education, Daughters of the American Revolution Medal of Honor, and the George Washington Honor Medal for the Freedom Foundation at Valley Forge. His work in media has merited several Angel Awards, Telly Awards, and the Dove Foundation Seal of Approval. He and his wife Cheryl reside in Aledo, Texas, and have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. And he is the co-author of the newly released book, This Precarious Moment: 6 Urgent Steps That Will Save you, your family, and our country. David Barton, so great to see you again, my friend, and welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Eric, great to be with you. Thanks for having me, brother.
Thank you. The last time you and I were together, we sat next to each other and were at a banquet for First Priority. And I was just enamored with just the depth of knowledge that you have in American history. You truly are America's historian. This book that you've written with Jim Garlow is really a clarion call to America to wake up and evaluate where we are and steps we can take to take America back for the Judeo-Christian foundational truth that the founding fathers, that you are, when I hear you speak, it's almost as if you were there with the founding fathers. I'm not calling you old, I'm just calling you an incredible researcher. Take me on a journey as to what prompted you and Jim to write this particular book.
Well, we as Americans, we have a few problems that we don't recognize. And one of them is the fact that we are so used to what we have that we think it will be here forever. We have had a Constitution 231 years, and the average length of a Constitution in the history of the world is only 17 years. Every nation averages a Constitution, or the world averages a Constitution every 17 years, and a bloody revolution every generation. Well, we go 242 years since our last revolution. We go 231 years with the same piece of paper. We just assume it's always going to be there. And so we think that whatever comes or goes, whoever the political leader is, whatever happens with the culture, it's going to be all right. And that's not accurate. And so why we call it This Precarious Moment is we look at we're standing on the precipice of a few cliffs and trying to decide whether we're going over the cliff or not. And we've got time to make up our mind, but we are right at the edge, unlike previous generations. I think this is the most polarized America's been since 1856. And that generation did not make the right decision, and it led to a bloody civil war, 600,000 Americans killed. So, and here's just a couple of examples of why we think it's so precarious. If you look in the history of the world, 5,500 years of recorded history, you take that period of time, you cannot find a socialistic nation anywhere in the world that has increased freedom for its people, that has produced prosperity for its people. You cannot find one that has become a world's power. And yet right now, 75% of students in college want to replace what we have with socialism. Now, that's the future generation of leaders in everything. If we go over that socialistic cliff, you don't turn back. You will no longer be a world's power. You will not survive. We will be into that 17-year Constitution mode. In the same way, of those in college right now, 53% of students in college think that we should restrict free speech. 19% actually believe that violence is an appropriate response to free speech they disagree with. I mean, just go down the list. This is a dangerous time. The church is more irrelevant than it's been in American history. The pastors are doing less. Only 2.8% of pastors today, 384,000 pastors, only 2.8% are willing to talk about what the Bible talks about if it's also in the culture. They think that if it's in the culture, they should shut up. And so we've only got 2.8% of pastors willing to be a voice in the culture, give direction, moral clarity. And just, I can go down the list of all these stats. So we are at some turning points. And just because we've always been here doesn't mean we always will be here. And that's why in the book we give very specific guidance on what individuals can do. We don't need a national fix. We don't need a federal fix. We don't need a state fix. We need individual fix, and that's what we focus on.
The Black Robe Regiment of our constitutional history, England was not afraid of the American Army. They were actually afraid of the Black Robe Regiment. That's what they wrote about. That's what they were most fearful of. And I think that most Americans don't have a clue as to what I'm talking about. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is, to me, the failure in America today. And you hit on it with the statistic. But if you could elaborate for just a moment on what happened during the Revolutionary War, who the Black Robe Regiment was, and how the Black Robe Regiment better rise up again today, or we are in this precarious moment that the pulpit is losing its power.
Yeah, the Black Robe Regiment, that was a term given by British official Peter Oliver to the clergy in America. The clergy in America, whether they were black or white, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, they wore that traditional black robe. And so they called, the British said if it hadn't been for those Black Robe Regiment guys, those pastors, they said America would still be a happy British colony. They blamed the pastors for what happened, which is why when the British arrived in America, they targeted pastors. For example, 1777, they reached New York City. There were 19 churches in New York City. They promptly burned 10 to the ground, and they desecrated the other 9. They went across Maine, burning churches. They went across New Jersey and Virginia, burning churches. If they can just shut up those pastors, America will go back to being a happy, subservient colony. So the pastors were very active. As a matter of fact, the highest attrition rate of any group in the American Revolution were pastors. We lost 4,335 American soldiers to British bullets, but we lost 11,400 soldiers or fighters to prisoner of war camps. And when the British caught a preacher as a prisoner of war, that's a guy you're not going to see again, essentially. I mean, that was the worst treatment, and that was the highest mortality of any group was the preachers. So what is significant, however, is the preachers not only led from the pulpit, they're the ones who gave the sermons on anything going on. When the Stamp Act was passed, they hammered on the Stamp Act. They hammered on when civil disobedience is appropriate and how civil disobedience should occur. They trained their guys in self-defense. When you look at the first 4 battles of the American Revolution, which is the Battle of Lexington, the Battle of North Bridge at Concord, the Road to Boston, and Bunker Hill, it's interesting that nobody went to the national commander-in-chief and said, what do you want us to do? The British are coming. In each case, like the Battle of Lexington, you had Pastor Jonas Clark who said, no worries, this is our community, we got it. He took 70 guys out of his church to face 700 British, and that was the Battle of Lexington. That was a pastor leading the church out to defend the town. When you get to later that day, the Battle of North Bridge at Concord, the Reverend William Emerson had 300 guys out there taking on 700 British, and that's the way all those early battles were. So when you look at the leader of military forces in New Jersey, it's the Reverend James Caldwell. I mean, I just go through all the things. And by the way, these guys were also involved in the legislatures. The original 1776 constitutions of so many states were written by preachers. There were a number of preachers who helped write the original Constitution of Massachusetts, of Pennsylvania, of all these different places. So preachers were involved in the legislature. They were involved in the military. They were involved in shaping the culture. Until 1890, 91% of all universities in America had a preacher as the president of the university. I mean, preachers were involved in everything. And right now, they're almost the most irrelevant group in America. If they disappeared, most people would not notice they were gone.
In this shift, do you see this as not only a clarion call to the average American, but do you see that this book is a clarion call for the pastors, for the clergy, to rise up? This issue of 501c3, and I can't get political, is the biggest lie that's been perpetrated against the church since the lies I was told as a little Jewish boy that Jesus wasn't the Messiah. It is never been taken to court. It has never been tried. No one has ever lost their 501c3 status for a message from the pulpit, and it is the lamest excuse I've ever heard for being politically correct. And you've identified racial healing, racism, as at its core, as the heart of the problem in America. And if you look at the church, we have the least diverse church structure in America of any country in the world. We have the white church, the black church, the Hispanic church. We are racially divided as the body of Christ, and this whole concept is not even biblical. The only division that there ever existed in the Bible was between Jew and Gentiles, and that was torn down, and that middle wall of separation was destroyed. Therefore, this concept of ethnos is a Greek concept that's been introduced by the Greek culture of taking Adonis as being the perfect model of a human being, and that was Adolf Hitler and Muhammad Ahmadinejad and all of those that try to create an Aryan race or a perfect human being, and that's the heart of this racial divide. It has nothing to do with the Bible, has nothing to do with Jesus, has nothing to do with Christianity, and yet Christianity is as racially divided as any other segment of society. And you and Jim have identified this is really at the heart of the problem of this precarious moment that America finds itself in.
Yeah, when you go back to the Bible, it's pretty simple. I mean, even as Samuel was choosing David for the leader, he kept getting the wrong guy. He wanted Jonadab and others. And God said, no, you guys get it wrong. You look on the outside, I'll look on the inside. You guys are concerned about what's outside. And so whether it be in Acts 17:26, where of one man he made all nations of men, whether it's Revelation 7:9, that all nations, all tribes, all peoples cast down their crowns before him. The only distinction he made, as you said, was Jew and Gentile, or the way we describe it, those who know God and those who don't know God. That's the only race that exists. There is the human race, and it's divided into two groups, those who know him and those who don't. And it's interesting that for those who had a biblical understanding, that really drove what they did. For example, the Pilgrims came to America in 1620, and the first load of slaves that came to America was Virginia, 1619. That was a much more secular thinking colony. The Pilgrims, much more Bible-oriented. The second load of slaves that came to America came to them. When they got the slaves, they promptly freed all the slaves and imprisoned all the slave owners, and using the Bible as their source. Because of the way they saw man, they had the longest lasting treaty in American history between Native Americans and Anglos, because you look at the inside, not the outside. All they care about is, do you know God? Do you not know God? And so for them, that was real simple. Today, we are all on superficialities. We look on the outside, and you even mentioned the 501c3. It's interesting that I've been part of the legal group that's been trying for 10 years to get a pastor in trouble. We have turned in more than 7,500 pastors to the IRS, sent the IRS copies of their sermons, say, look, they endorsed in the pulpit. They covered politics in the pulpit, and IRS refuses to touch it because they would rather have 384,000 pastors think you can't say anything than to go into court and lose and have everybody know you can't say anything. But I'm actually not quite accurate on that. You know, that's good hyperbole. Here's the deal. President Trump has told the Justice Department it cannot enforce the Johnson Amendment. Can't do it. So for the next 2 years, guaranteed, no one is going to go before the IRS on what they say in the pulpit. Now, having that, if you will, having that get out of jail free card, is it going to change behavior? Nope, it's not. There's not a single pastor that's going to now start speaking because they have a get out of jail free card, because they've been told that's not what you're supposed to do from the pulpit. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we work very closely with George Barton, a national pollster, and of that 384,000 churches in America, he calls between 500 and 600 churches every day, just asking them basic questions. And what we find is of that 384,000, 72% of pastors, senior pastors in churches say, we do not believe the Bible. We don't think the Bible applies today. We don't think it's relevant. We do not believe the Bible. Well, that leaves you 28% that do believe the Bible, and we call them theologically conservative churches. And so then you poll in that group, 500 to 600 pastors every day. And as you poll in that group, you ask them, how do you know if your church is successful? And the top 5 answers they give, none of them come out of the Bible. And these are the Bible-leading pastors. Top 5 answers are how many people attend church on Sunday, the size of the offerings, how many people I have on staff, how many programs we offer, and how much square footage we have. Now, the problem is you will always work to enhance what you measure. So if you're going to measure how many people attend on Sunday, you're not going to say anything that might get people leaving or get them offended or whatever. If you do that, you lose offerings. That's your second most important measurement. And so what happens, rather than Jesus in John 6, he spoke so many hard things, all the crowd left. He turned to his disciples and said, are you guys leaving me too? He said, no, you got the bread of life. We'll stick with you. But Jesus went through hundreds of thousands of followers who couldn't stick with him. He kept focusing on the discipleship, on the 12. And the church today is all about masses. It's not about discipling. It's about all the masses. And so as long as we've got that wrong paradigm, we're not going to move. The other thing that I will throw out, I'm convinced that America is in the midst of a national revival right now. There's just no doubt in my mind. Now, the deal is national revivals last for decades. The first Great Awakening was 1730 to 1770. That's a 40-year revival. The second one, Second Great Awakening, 1801 to 1878, 77-year revival. What's interesting is people never knew they were in a revival till it was over, and historians looked back and said, that must have been a revival. George Whitefield in the First Great Awakening, he didn't know he was in a revival. It was hard work what he did. He got pounded, he got pelted, churches attacked him, they disliked him. Second Great Awakening with its Charles Finney, Lorenzo Dow, Francis Asbury, it was the churches who beat up on all the preachers in Second Great Awakening. So what you see is historically the church is always the last to get on with spiritual renewals. They're the people get it a long time before the church gets it, and the pastors are the last ones to jump on board. Eventually, in about the last 25% of the revival, they jump on board and take credit for it. But it's always wrong. It always comes outside the church. And that's what America is doing right now. We're having to go outside the church to have spiritual growth and spiritual renewal, etc. And it should not be that way. God's shepherds should be leading the flock. And right now, they are part of the reason the flock is being hindered. And I don't say that with hyperbole. I say that with hundreds of polling data, polling on the pastors' thinking and what they do in their behavior. So again, while this is very bad news, at the same time, that's one of the indications to me that I think we are in a revival. And there's a lot of other things I can point to as well. But I think even though it's a precarious moment, I think we have the opportunity to save America and bring it back to a foundation that we've not seen in a long time.
When we look at the pulpit and what's not happening, what do you think we can do to engage people like myself? We're a non-sponsored, commercial-free. That way I can talk about anything I want. We're a 501c3 teaching ministry, which allows us to teach anything. And it doesn't have to be Christianity. We take on Islam, we take on false doctrine, we take on apostasy, we take on divided Christianity. I'm a Jew. I'm a Pentecostal, charismatic, spirit-filled Jew, ordained Baptist minister, ordained rabbi, and there are so many sacred cows. I want to tip them all and bring this to light, because the congregants can rise up. The people can say, we want to hear from the pastor what it's just like voting in 2 weeks. We have to make our voices heard, and this is what's going to bring about revival. How do we empower the people to become vocal? We have the Democratic Party and the liberal left that are noise makers. They have been noise makers for years, and they shout louder, they organize better, and the messaging is empty, but it's loud. And people are distracted by the tone and the quality of this high pitch as opposed to the meat and the content of it. But yet there is a message that is life-changing. There's a message that's life-giving. How do we get that message out in the areas of racism, in the areas of immigration, in the areas of Israel, in the areas of millennials, in the areas of the church? All those issues that you and Jim Garlow touch on in the book. How do we get that message out?
You know, the pulpit should be covering that, but they're not. But that's no excuse for other people not to know the solutions and what's going on in all of those areas. Jesus, and not Jesus, but in the Pauline epistles is a great line about if you need to believe the truth. If you love the truth, if you don't love the truth, then you can believe a lie and be damned, is what the scripture says. So what happens is America's not in love with the truth anymore. We're in love with whatever the hyperbole is, whatever our viewpoints are. Most Christians now create God in their own image. They say, you know, I'm a Christian. This is what I believe. Well, that's what God believes too. And so they condone their behavior. They condone their beliefs. They condone everything they're doing based on, I'm a Christian. Here's what I do. That's God's view. Right now, we know that only 10% of Christians have a biblical worldview. Only 4% of millennials have a biblical worldview. Now, I can point to the pastors and say, boy, have you guys done a lousy job of discipleship, but that does not excuse the fact that every single individual has access to God's Word, should be studying God's Word. God tells them to hide His Word in their heart. There's no excuse for people not knowing, and there's no excuse for people not knowing the truth, especially today. Yeah, you can listen to the news, but you know what? There's all sorts of alt media out there that gives you another side of the story. Proverbs 18:17 says, one side sounds good till you hear the other side. We're not, excuse me, we're not in love with the truth like we used to be. Excuse me. That is no longer something that we emphasize as we used to, and we need to do that. Now, I will point out right now, 2 out of 3 Christians in America think that there is no absolute moral truth. Essentially, 2 out of 3 Christians say the 10 Commandments doesn't apply today. It's what we essentially were saying. There is absolute moral truth, and what we find is within about 30 seconds, I can have any one of those people agreeing that there is absolute moral truth. We've just been trained that we're supposed to come up with our own truth, make our own truth. We're supposed to live by our own standards. That's the culture. Now, for pastors, I think pastors are missing an absolute wonderful opportunity. It's like somebody walks up to you and gives you the keys to the greatest car you've ever wanted and said, this is yours. All you have to do is get in it and drive away with it. You can have it if you want it. And they say, no, I don't think I want to do it. It's crazy. The opportunity, I was on a national TV program, and the host asked me, he said, you know, Christians, I mean, pastors aren't talking about stuff. Do Christians want to hear, what do Christians want to hear their pastors talk about? And I thought, that's a really good question. I said, let me check on that. I'll get back to you. And so after the program was over, I went and called George Barnum. I said, George, here's the deal. Do Christians want to hear stuff from their pastors? And if they do, what do they want to hear? And so George said, great question. It took him several months to get all the research together. He did polling all over the country. And what we found was there are 14 issues where 70% of churchgoers are begging their pastor to talk about these issues. And what we found, issue number 1, 91% wanted to hear about abortion, about pro-life, about unwed mothers, about adoption, about foster care. Issue number 2 is religious persecution. What should I do? What should the government do? What's the condition of the world? I think issue number 3 was LGBTQ issues. Israel was number 4. Number 5 was America's Christian heritage. I mean, you go down the issues, bioethics and cloning, economics, civil disobedience, the things people wanted to hear about. And we're talking in that vicinity, again, 14 issues, 70% or higher of the people wanted to hear this. And we have less than 5% of pastors talking about those issues, and the people are begging for it. What happens is exactly what you mentioned in the media. When a pastor talks about that, some of the 30% is going to go yell at him and say, you shouldn't be talking about that. and the 70% doesn't say anything to back up the pastor. The 70% is the ones who need to go to the pastor and say, Pastor, here's this study. Here's what we want to hear about. You know what? If you will start talking about this, you're going to get criticized, but we will have your back. If you'll talk about this stuff, we will come to your defense. We'll make sure that you get protected. And if parishioners would do that, and they can go to our website, wallbuilders.com, they can download that George Barna poll. It's called God's People Want to Know. Go through it, give it to the pastor, say, here's what we want to hear, Pastor. And if you do this, we got your back. And I got 50 of my friends to sign a letter. We'll stand with you, brother. You start teaching us on this stuff, and that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is the same way we do if we go to a hamburger shop and we keep paying a lot of money and we keep getting cheap, dirty, ugly food. It's got bugs crawling on it. We'll go to another hamburger shop. And if you keep going to a church where the pastor will not address these issues, you know what? Pick up your tail end, pick up your money, and go somewhere else where you can get better food, because you're not getting fed where you are. And don't keep hanging in there just because you've always gone to that church. You need to start using the free market approach to religion and send a message to these pastors that don't want to address this stuff. It's in the Bible. We want you to talk about what's in the Bible. If you don't, I'm going to one of those 2.8% of churches that will. I'm going to where I can get some food. So those are two approaches that individual citizens can take that will help change the culture in what the church does and what the church addresses.
We're talking with David Barton, co-author of This Precarious Moment, 6 Urgent Steps that will save you, your family, and your country. This is but one of the critical areas that has America on the tipping point of a new generation rising up that wants to take us in a direction that is destined to fail. But God says that this is our time and this is our moment. And David Barton, historian that studied 240 years of American history, says that it's not too late. There are things we can do. And the main issues that he addresses in the book with Jim Garlow are racial healing, immigration, Israel, millennials, a Judeo-Christian nation, and the church. When we come back from break, we're going to tackle these other topic areas and equip you to take back America for the Lord. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with David Barton, co-author of This Precarious Moment, 6 Urgent Steps That Will Save You, Your Family, and Our Country. David, welcome back to the show.
Eric, good to be back with you, sir.
David, we've clearly identified the church is not doing what the church was called to do, but that doesn't excuse the parishioner. That shines a light on the pastor. The average American citizen, if truly statistically 71 or 72% were Christians, then how is it the Democratic Party is not the ruling party of 72% of the American population? And how is it that someone can identify as a Christian and vote for abortion and for same-sex marriage, which are both biblically forbidden concepts? So I question statistically that self-identification model. The Bible says you'll know them by their fruit, and I find them to be fruits and not to be Christians, and I'm applying the biblical application of being a fruit inspector. We have immigration is a huge problem that we're facing. Now, historically, the year I was born, 1952, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952 was passed, and it said that no person may enter the borders of this country that is willing to swear an allegiance to some authority higher than the Constitution of the United States. This was not a religious test. This was an allegiance test, that if you were going to come to this country, as my father and his family did from Hungary, as my grandfather and his family did from Galicia, that they were not going to swear their allegiance to the Tsar. They were not going to swear their allegiance to the Communist Party, but they were going to swear their allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. It's since been amended, but it still says the same thing, and those that believe in Sharia have claimed very publicly that Sharia is higher than the United States Constitution, and so we are legally entitled to stop someone from becoming an American citizen or even entering our border by law, passed by the legislature of the United States of America, not voted on in the judiciary, not legislated in the judiciary, but passed and signed into law. And now we have a lawless America that does not want to abide by the laws of this country, which are constitutionally created. That is anarchy, that is not socialism. And we now are facing this immigration situation that also borderlines on anarchy and not on socialism. And how is all this happening in a country that is supposed to be bound by laws? We say that we are the most civilized society because we have this long-standing Constitution, but we have a minority that are so opposed and so vocal to the overthrow of the constitutionality of immigration, the constitutionality of so many of these life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Two of those have been eliminated, in my opinion, and that is life because of abortion, and liberty, which means I cannot be outspoken about my freedom of speech and stand against or for something that other people are opposed to because my liberty is being invaded upon. That only leaves me with pursuit of happiness, and that's only 1/3 of the promises of the Constitution of the United States. How do we get here, and what do we do about it?
Well, where we are right now is the same problem we have in so many other areas. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And what we don't know is significant. For example, in the immigration issue, and you mentioned earlier, about 72% of the nation professes Christianity. That's the label they put on themselves. They don't live that way. Abortion, 76% of Protestants do not want to see Roe v. Wade ended. 200,000 born-again Christians a year get abortions every year. It is Christians that keep Planned Parenthood alive. It's not the other side. It's Christians that do it. Now, here's my problem. I don't like the word Christian. I try not to use the word Christian. I use the word biblical. I don't think whether you're Christian matters or not. I think whether you're biblical matters or not. You can call yourself an apple tree, but if you keep growing oranges, you're not an apple tree. You're an orange tree. So the fruit inspector, you're exactly right. But what happens, we are in a position today where that Americans know so little about our history, so little about the Bible, and so little about the Constitution. I mean, you're talking free speech. I got the right of free speech, right of religion. Only 1 in 1,000 excuse me, only 1 in 1,000 Americans can identify the freedoms in the First Amendment. Well, if you don't know what those freedoms are, you can't protect them, and you sure won't use them because you don't even know what your protections are. So that's where we are with immigration. As I watched the hearings that happened at the Capitol, they had several panels of faith leaders come testify on immigration, and the most popular verse was Leviticus 19:34. Be kind to the strangers. You were a stranger in Egypt. And so Christians go, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do, be kind to strangers. No, that's not what the Bible says, and that's not what Leviticus 19:34 is. And by the way, our founding fathers, when they did the first immigration laws, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution set up a uniform rule of naturalization, and then they passed 3 laws in 1790, 1795, 1798 to give that uniform rule. Those laws they passed reflect all the biblical precepts on immigration. It's amazing. And so when you look back and you know what the Bible actually says, and by the way, the big deal in the Bible is assimilation. The stranger in the land, that was one of 3 categorizations of those who could come into your land. You had the native-born Jew, the no question person's a Jew. You had the proselyte who wants to become a Jew, is not born a Jew, but wants to become one. And then the third group you have was those that came in and worked in the land. They were not Jews, but they lived by the laws of the land, and they worked there, what we would call maybe a green card. So you have the natural-born citizen, you have the immigrant who wants to become a citizen, and you have those who just come to work there, take some money, and go back home. So it's stranger. The word stranger in Leviticus 19:34 is actually that second category. The more proper translation is a proselyte. So remember that if a proselyte comes into your land, to treat them kindly because you were proselytes in Egypt. In other words, if they want to come in and assimilate to the land, and a proselyte is exactly what you see in the book of Ruth, in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. Of course, Naomi is an Israeli citizen. She's a natural-born Israeli, a Jew. And then you have Ruth, who's from Moab. She's not a Jew, but she says, I want to be with you. I want to proselyte. I want to be a Jew. I'm going to sleep where you sleep. I'll go where you go. I'll eat what you eat. I'll do what you do. I'll follow all your laws. I'll do everything that you do. That's what an immigrant's supposed to be. They come in and say, I want to do what you do. I want to be part of you. I'm renouncing Moab. I'm renouncing my former citizenship. There's no open borders in the Bible. God is the one who lays out the boundaries of nations. And if you think there's open borders, you're going to have a rude awakening when you get to heaven, because we're going to heaven, we hope. But to be citizens of heaven, you have to conform to the laws of heaven. You can't just show up in heaven and say, I'm coming in and I'm going to live here. No, there are laws you have to conform with to get into heaven. And that's what immigration is all about. So we really lack that understanding. I love the way the founding fathers set it up. It was all about assimilation. And by the way, they were huge pro-immigrant. I mean, you look at the signers of the Constitution, 7 of the 39 guys who signed the Constitution were immigrants. You look at George Washington's original Supreme Court. He appointed 3 immigrants to the original Supreme Court. If you look at his Secretary of War, he was an immigrant. The Secretary of Treasury, 4 of the first 6 Secretaries of Treasury were immigrants. We didn't have trouble with immigrants. What we wanted was someone who wanted to be an American. They wanted to conform to American beliefs and customs and not bring in Sharia law, and not set up a parallel culture, and not have their own languages. And that was never it. And so when you go back to what we did with immigration, it was all about assimilation. If you're coming here to tear down the nation, that's an enemy. We don't want you in. I don't let people into my house who want to destroy my house or hurt my family. I'm careful who I let into my house. And that was our understanding biblically, historically, and constitutionally with immigration. And we lack all 3 of those perspectives today. If we can get them back, this is an easy thing to turn. Now, we're currently at 22 million illegal immigrants who are here. We believe there are solutions for dealing with that. We think there are biblical ways of handling all that, and constitutional ways. But it's just that right now we don't even know enough to know where to begin. And that's why we did that book, was to give people some guidelines on how to get back to some right knowledge on which we can act and make some solutions.
You know, the terms you're talking about in Hebrew are the difference between gerim, which is the sojourner that wants to pitch their tent with the camp of Israel. It means I want to live where you live, and I will abide by the traditions that you abide by. Then there's the goyim, which is the nations. Those are the nations. But yet, when you take a look at Abraham, he was a sheikh among sheikhs. He had 2 foreign leaders that had a relationship with him, an alliance with him, but they didn't live within each other's borders. But they knew each other's customs, and they were respectful. And this is something that we don't have in America. We don't have respect racially. We don't have respect immigration-wise. We don't have respect. But we also don't apply the standard that says that my parents, I have the Immigration and Naturalization Service documents for when my family came over and when they were made citizens and what their process was. And it was something that they were fleeing the Tsar. They were fleeing the birth of the Soviet Republic to come to a land of freedom. But my grandfather immediately joined the United States Navy to go back and fight the ones that this was the heart, was that I'm now an American citizen. I'm going to fight against those that drove me out. This was the heart of America, and that's not the heart of America today. We're confused, and I think your book brings a great deal of clarity to this to understand, and why it's so motivating for people to get it. We have this generation of millennials that are being raised in an environment where free speech. You know, I keep 2 things at your recommendation by my side. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence and the Bible. They are by my side at all times as the documents under which I live my life, and I reference all the time. And they're always here on my set. They're always by my nightstand at home, because this is the only way I can understand what it is that I'm supposed to be living in as an American. And this is the set of rules and regulations and guidelines under which I operate. And so I have an understanding of it, certainly not the depth of understanding you have. But we have a generation that is now under a system that I'm particularly opposed to. I was I love Ronald Reagan, but I didn't love the Department of Education. And I came out of college as an educator. And I never felt that the federal government belonged in the education business. And so I was very much opposed to the appointment of Bill Bennett as the first Secretary of Education, and the fact that the federal government's involved in education at all, which was not something the Constitution provided for. This was not an area of government, but it was one that became established because I happen to live in a state where Common Core is the most ineffective method of communication to an impoverished community like Selma, Alabama. And to try to get them to standardize in a vernacular and an understanding, and try to get math scores and reading scores up to a national level, to an environment where it does not appeal to the impoverished, it makes no sense to the impoverished, and it's an ideology that's being advanced that is so confusing and it's so non-compelling that if I have to introduce my 7-year-old to transgenderism, and I have to introduce evolution, and I have to deny the biblical truth, then what we're having to do is deprogram our children because of a federal mandate. And so I find that to be problematic. But we have a generation that grew up under that entire Common Core environment, and we call them Millennials. And so they have been programmed no different, and I hate to say this because as a Jew, when I invoke the name of Hitler, may his name be cursed, but he went after the youth. And because he went after the youth and he created the Hitler Youth, and they became a powerful force in the radicalization and the Hitlerization, the Nazi of Nazism at that age group level of the group that we're talking about, the Millennials. We have a potential problem on our hands of deprogramming and re-educating an entire generation. How do you and Jim approach this in the book?
Yeah, you know, when you look at millennials, they have a series of problems statistically that we haven't seen in any generation in American history. For example, millennials will now they'll go as high as their upper 30s. So 36, 37, 38 are millennials and down to Gen Zers, which is the new generation. But in that group of 38 and below, you'll find that 59% of them have never been married ever. Now, that is the highest group in American history of not being involved in marriage. And you find that 57% of the children of millennials were born outside of marriage. So that's the highest with that category. Now, we have dozens and dozens of studies from right, left, center, everything that say, you know, when there's not a man and a woman in the home, the children will have higher crime rates, higher gang involvement, they'll have lower educational scores, they'll have higher juvenile problems, higher mental illness problems, higher depression problems. It's all there. But these guys have been taught that marriage means nothing, it's insignificant. So they're raising a generation of kids who will now suffer the effects of the fact that they didn't know things. But here's the deal with millennials. You can look at them and you can point to all these things. I didn't when we opened, you know, 3/4 of them want socialism, and half of them don't think free speech should be protected. They didn't learn that by themselves. You know, there was a generation that taught them to do that, and that's us. The Bible, Jesus says in Luke 6:40, every student, when he's fully trained, will be like his teacher. Well, you hit education, it's the pulpit, it's the home, it's all the stuff that we didn't talk about raising these kids. But here's the good news. These kids, I think God is going to use them, and here's where I think, again, we're in a revival. It's the next generation. If you recall the story of the Philistines in Judges 9, Israel had been under the oppression of Philistines for generations. They keep crying out to God, deliver us, get our culture right. We can't worship you. We can't do what we want in your way. And God says, okay. And so in Judges 9, he sent an angel to say, I've heard your prayers. I'm going to answer your prayers. And then he looked up a guy named Manoah, said, Manoah, here's how it's going to happen. Your wife's going to get pregnant. When that kid grows up, he will be the national deliverer. You go, wait a minute, time out. You said you answered my prayers. I got to wait for a new generation to come along before I get deliverance? And that's really the way that God sends a revival. He sends a new generation in that does it differently than the previous generation. It's the difference of old wineskins and new wineskins. Now, while this generation that we have right now has really done a disservice to millennials by what we've taught them, by the way we've raised them, by what we've allowed them to believe without any opposition, they don't know the other side of the story. What's cool about these guys is they are very, very easy to turn, but it has to be relationally. It's one-on-one. And this is where the church messed up. The church in the 1960s got into mass everything. Mass evangelism, mass conversion. We say the sinner's prayer. We get everybody saved. Jesus was into discipleship. He wasn't into conversions. He was into making disciples of all men. He didn't spend time with the hundreds of thousands that followed him. He spent time with the 3 and the 12. And that's what millennials are. They are that generation that they are so easy to turn if you create an individual relationship with them. You don't have to believe what they believe, and they may not believe you, but you know what? If they find that you're sincere, they're willing to listen to you with an open heart and an open mind. And you can start asking them questions. And that's one of the things we do. We spend the summers taking groups of millennials, taking Gen Zers, taking college, high school kids, and we help teach them the apologetics of what they never learned. And part of the easiest way to do that is to ask questions. Jesus in the New Testament asked more than 300 questions. We don't pay attention to that. Jesus did not answer many questions, but he sure asked a lot of questions. And asking questions is what causes you to think. And so we'll get these millennials together and say, hey, can you name a single instance in history where socialism has brought more freedom and has brought more prosperity to the people? And we'll just leave it hanging there. We'll just start asking questions. And if you do that without trying to browbeat them, without trying to convert them, without trying to teach them, man, they engage in dialogue really well. And when they change, they become great leaders. They're very aggressive in a new direction. So I'm thrilled with what's happening in millennials. I've never had as much fun in my life as I do now, seeing these guys change. But it's back to discipleship, which is what the church was supposed to be doing anyway, was taking and discipling individuals. And I think God's given us a solution to a lot of our problems with the millennial generation because they are turnable. They do respond to truth, even though they've been taught there is no truth. And if the church will do what it's supposed to do, the answer is going to be these millennials.
Well, we have run out of time, but the book is called This Precarious Moment, 6 Urgent Steps That Will Save You, Your Family, and Our Country, breaking down the major points of racism, immigration, Israel, millennials, a Judeo-Christian nation, and the church. Answers to your pressing questions and the pressing issues facing this nation, all contained within the pages of this book. This is a must-read. If you want to make a difference, it's going to begin with you. It's always been the responsibility of the one, and you are the one. David Barton, thank you so much for spending the time with us here on Revealing the Truth. I hope to see you again soon, my friend.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate all you do, brother. Bless you.
God bless you. Goodbye. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.